The title of this paper is Why We Still Do It. Just as a disclaimer, this is not a research paper, but my own ruminations and observations based on 30 years of experience dealing with artists and just looking at the world. 40,000 years ago, art was created on the walls of caves and carved in stone. To put into context the length of time to which I'm referring, let's recall our celebration 13 years ago that welcomed the new millennium. We marked the passing of 1,000 years of human history. Contemplate for a moment what took place between the years 1000 and 2000. How swift an observation can we make? One shudders at the mere idea of it. It would take more than a moment to note what took place in that time, the discoveries, the inventions, the advances of civilization, as well as the bloodshed and horrors etched in a decade of centuries that brought us to this moment in time, a virtual tsunami of memory DNA. We now multiply that vast period by 40, and it's unfathomable to consider. But what was created on those cave walls is absolutely startling in its quality. Principles of art making in terms of form and structure are in evidence in these elaborate works. The juxtaposition of forms, mostly of animal figures and hunting scenes created by humans in the late stages of the Pleistocene era, has a poetic sophistication that places it well within the canon of great art. And while it may be arguable whether the first forms of art coincided with the origins of verbal language, I think we can easily conjecture that whatever spoken language was employed at that time didn't come close in sophistication and complexity to the visual. I believe one of the essential motivating forces of the evolution of humanity comes from our constant drive and desire to communicate. And visual art has always been and will continue to be a powerful means of communication. A language with a grammar and vocabulary intrinsic to its nature. Color, line, and form in both 2- and 3-dimensional media make up the main components of its lexicon. From the earliest implementation all that time ago to its current pluralistic state, visual art remains a compelling enterprise for reasons that have both changed over the many epochs of social evolution and in many cases still remain the same. If we ask ourselves today, what made all of us want to go down this road, to make art, to choose a life in art, there are a myriad of reasons. What was the spark that set it all in motion? Was there a sudden epiphany? Or was it something that was always there? Maybe there were a few moments of realization, an encounter with a work of art that evoked a visceral response, fascination with the act of creating, and the use of materials that give substance to what we see. For some, the idea of being called an artist by one's peers is enough to get them in front of the easel every day, but personally, I find that the weakest reason for the pursuit of art or any other endeavor for that matter. I remember being told by a student once, I want to make portraits like Rembrandt, landscapes like Corot, and still lifes like Chardin. I knew then there was a problem. Art is not a demonstration of prowess, but a means of expression. Picture making is not a performing art. While they are both examples of the sublime, marveling at Titian's Rape of Europa is a different experience from hearing Jascha Heifetz play Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto. They both enliven our spirit, but the senses they stimulate process information differently. The musician gives life to a composition by interpreting the melody and rhythm directed by the composer. The visual artist makes his or her awareness tangible, not through the act of recording what one sees, but, or more likely, what one thinks one sees, but by understanding and interpreting the visual sensations and rhythms of art in order to describe nature. Picasso said, art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. Magritte's famous painting of a pipe has written on the canvas underneath the image, Ceci n'est pas une pipe, This is not a pipe. Making reference to the fact that it is an image. In Titian's great painting of the abduction of Europa, one of a number of paintings by Titian, logic is turned upside down. The god Zeus, her abductor, having taken on the form of a bull who is, interestingly enough, equal in size to his captive Europa, riding on his back, is still partially submerged in the sea with the fish swimming alongside, but is seen well above the land below. I'm sure there are more than a few viewers of this masterpiece hanging in the Garden Museum in Boston who think the greatest painter of the Venetian Renaissance would have benefited from lessons in three-point perspective. Prior to the development of mass communication, schools of art making were very distinctive. In the West, the era of Byzantine art, that was the outgrowth of the Greek and Roman epochs, held sway for much of the era prior to the Renaissance. Image making was under the scrutiny of the church, and boundaries were narrowly defined. By the 14th century through the 16th, European painting began to have the distinctions of the artist's authorship, giving rise to a greater spirit of independence. These unique voices still had a common dialect within the communities in which they were created, defined by the Florentines, the Venetians, the Germans, the Flemish, each school reflecting common artistic values that identified their origins, influenced by their religious and political values. From the Renaissance came the Baroque, beginning in the early 17th century, which in part was a response to the Protestant Reformation. Rembrandt, Velázquez, Poussin, Rubens, Bernini, and Caravaggio were among its leaders. Rococo followed with its flourishes and highly decorative style. Then came neoclassicism, ushered in by the Napoleonic era, and a return to the formal. This history in the blink of an eye is only meant to convey how progressive periods of art history would go from occupying centuries of adherence to shorter and shorter periods as societies changed and knowledge and ideas started to be expressed more freely and with more efficient ways of conveying information. For example, the invention of the printing press. Despite the invention of photography in 1839, when predictions that painting would be dead due to the fact that scientific means could be used to record all the images we wanted, art continued to flourish. The camera enabled artists to go beyond the literal, to explore the truth created by light itself. Impressionism emerged during and to some extent as a result of the Industrial Revolution. With the availability of tubed oil paint, artists could paint outdoors. The expansion of the middle class gave way to more leisure time, and Impressionist artists like Renoir, Manet, and Monet were able to capture the enjoyment of a growing middle class population with more leisure time to enjoy, and with a more expressive use of color and brushwork. Artists were free to explore the pure sensation of light. Artists like Cézanne, Seurat, and Van Gogh pushed the envelope even further with deeper analysis of the picture plane, observation of color based on scientific theory, and greater emotional expression. Impressionist and post-impressionist works are prized because they express sensuality, utilizing the material of paint texturally and employing more vivid colors that enhance the emotional connectivity of the artist with a natural environment as well as a setting for the changing societal structure. Scenes of outdoor life became the norm. American Impressionism rose at the end of the 19th century as travel to Europe increased and Paris emerged as the center of the art world. Sargent, Chase, Hassam, and Cassatt were among those who led the charge of a new era in art on this side of the Atlantic. Post-Impressionism would lead to the emergence of modernism, which also coincided with the advancement of scientific theory. The deeper our understanding became of the physical structure of the universe, the more analytical and reactive art would become. This new awareness of structure of the universe must have been an influence, even if indirectly. One cannot remove oneself from the changing collective consciousness now strongly affected by the increasingly effective tools of communication. Picasso, Braque, Matisse, Modigliani, Bonnard, Soutine, the Nabis, the Fauves, Cubists, the Blue Rider School, Dada, Bauhaus, Futurists, the Ashcan School, the New York School, and others that don't immediately come to mind. All these factions developed in the 20th century and were all the result of the changing world around us and a proliferation of new ideas and the breakdown of the old European order. Each one was based on philosophical edicts founded on aesthetic values. Realism began to be dismissed by the prevailing circles of post-war ideologies, written off as out of touch with new and purportedly more sophisticated ways of seeing. 2 world wars within a 30-year period changed our collective landscape, literally and metaphorically, as art redefined us once again. The naturalistic image making could no longer speak adequately of the human condition. Dada employed an array of media to speak of our human folly. And they did it well, as all of the modernists, including the abstract expressionists, had a solid educational background in art. They knew how to draw. They knew the underlying structure of art, and they were mostly taught in atelier schools in apprenticeship environments. After the Second World War, more and more accredited institutions began offering degrees in fine arts, to some extent to take advantage of the millions of veterans who would study on the GI Bill. It was the proliferation of accredited institutions offering fine arts majors that changed the pedagogy of arts education after World War II. Under this new institutional umbrella, the aesthetic divisions began to blur, and art started to become intellectualized, leaving materials and skill-based education in favor of a more theory-based approach. This been there, done that postmodernism view of traditionally created art redefined its entire concept. Just as art had kept up with a changing world through the era of modernism, suddenly technology started to outpace everything, and just as suddenly the acts of painting, sculpture, drawing, etc. were deemed outdated. Logic had it that technology would be the new medium to speak for the new contemporaneous environment. The video camera would supplant the paintbrush, the computer screen, the new canvas. Software is now the new image maker. And speaking of image making, there is still the prevailing school of art that continues to be the flagship of the postmodern era and the champion of the world of corporate culture which now dominates our lives, and that is pop art. Not since the interdependent relationship of Christianity and the rise of Europe's monarchies has there been a greater marriage of 2 cultural entities than pop art and corporate America. Once Andy Warhol's painted pictures of Campbell's soup cans and the like were accepted as art, destiny was written. The symbol of corporate identity, the logo, is now the altar to which we worship. With a museum as arbiter, corporate culture dominates our entire system of values. The image makes the statement. Warhol's silkscreen of Elvis Presley says all you need to know about the American psyche. The image of the modern hero presented by the ideal image of the hip, put that together and hang it on a museum wall, and you have an even greater image, one of a shrine, hallowed ground upon which we seek the redemption of monetization sanctioned by cultural authority. Aggrandizing the image to define it as art is now an industry, a boon for collectors who can control the market by adhering to the system of dubbing something art merely by determining where it hangs. Take the stop sign off the corner post and hang it on a museum wall, and voila, your 15 minutes has just begun. And who knows, if you do that enough times, the meter might just keep running and your image might become indelibly etched as an icon. Is that a consummation devoutly to be wished? The Elvis, by the way, recently sold for $37 million. Maybe that answers the question. 50 years after Brillo soapboxes made it to the big time, our deference to the iconographic power of the image, including the image of the image, which are the creators, has only expanded. The Supreme Court of Cultural Justice has underwritten the idea that anything can be considered art. It's all in how you market it. It's the image that rules. The marketplace itself has become a medium, the ultimate determiner of value, the great equalizer. The art school days when your instructor declared, "You're not here to learn a trade," are over. It no longer fits in our rationale. If it's good, it will sell, has been replaced by, if it sells, it must be good. But what does that mean for those artists still working today with traditional materials? We can talk about centuries-old works that have made it to the pantheon up to and including the 20th century. But let's look at how much has changed in the last 40 years alone. We talk about epochs, and yet just in the last 2 generations, there have been more change in technological advancement than in more than 100 years or more prior to that. So how do the practitioners move forward? How can we interpret with age-old tools the information-driven an information-driven world where sound-biting, texting, sexting, Twitter posting, Facebook friending, social networking, YouTubing, emailing, Googling, internet surfing, cloud computing, GPSing, linking in, virtual imaging, and smartphone applications that do everything from providing casino gambling to making photographs look like paintings to hailing a cab in New York? Have we lost our relevance? Has the meditative process become obsolete? Has the paintbrush become the equivalent of a buggy whip? Have we joined the ranks of those who feel disconnected with the high-tech social media that has become the ever-extended family dinner table? Are we Philistines among the techno-literate, old believers trying to survive amongst the increasing population of lost souls linking themselves exiled into the virtual wilderness, keepers of a flame destined to be extinguished? My unequivocal, absolutely resolute, unwavering, black and white, not one step back response is, who cares? No one needs to justify the need, the desire, or the compulsion to learn a language outside what's already known. The magic that is conjured from a series of paint strokes, the juxtaposition of forms on a 2-dimensional plane, the negative space that supports the position of a sculptural form require no explanation. No endeavor has been invented that more closely connects us with the best qualities of being human than the creation of art. Exploring the relationship of shape and color inspired by nature connects us to our past and our future by being firmly ensconced in the here and now. We not only learn from what we do, we learn how to see more clearly and reap the rewards of the great art that came before us. If we look at the work that preceded photography, an early landscape by Corot, a still life by Chardin, a portrait by Rembrandt, Titian, or Ingres or Velázquez, do we not see the truth of what they beheld? Can you see what the artist saw structured in a way to outrealize the result of any recording device? How fortunate we are to have that ability. We can come back to the same works over and over again, read more, see further, have an unending dialogue with the artist through the art he or she created. No software code can accomplish that. A software application that turns a photograph into an image emulating a graphite drawing cannot take the place of the intelligent expression of the artist's perception. Art makes the ordinary eloquent. In the creative act, a paintbrush becomes a conductor's baton. A hammer and chisel in the right hands can make stone appear to float. And while many of us set out to pursue this in order to establish an identity, to be able to call oneself an artist, the more we can shed that identity and get rid of it like an outdated polyester suit, the more we can pay attention to what's in front of us. And what is in front of us does not have to have a name. We don't have to paint a bowl of apples. We can paint a series of reddish shapes on a larger white circular shape that evokes a metaphor. Our ability to perceive is not limited to that which we can name. What makes art is as relevant today as it was at the dawn of civilization is that we can still express our awareness and the million sensations that stimulate our senses with a paintbrush. When we understand what we see, any material used to express that understanding is right, and any and all materials used to communicate what we perceive should be explored. The more we understand the language of art, the underlying structure of the picture plane and its proportion, the rhythms of three-dimensional forms, the better able we are to express ourselves poetically. Rhythm and harmony are common elements in all art forms. The poetry that comes from tapping into these rhythms that art determines, not what the subject determines. We speak this language because it conveys what verbal language cannot. It reaches the portals of the spirit words cannot access. As a wise man once told me, the subject of art is not portraiture or landscape or still life. The subject of art is art. Creation is the ultimate act of freedom. Creation for the painter is a dialogue with the canvas. We are now in a world of absolute magic. We are engaged, connected to something outside ourselves. We don't need an identity or an image. We surrender to the calling of art. It's Zen, the chant of Om. Of course, that's only when we get it right. Most of the time, we're banging our heads against the wall, not understanding why we couldn't get it to look as we wanted it to. But I don't think any of us would have it any other way. There are still endeavors in life that call to us. I like to say that art picked me, not the other way around. And if question why we do it, why we continue to move paint around or clay or crayon, when there are so many computer applications, so many means of communication at our disposal, my response would be, well, we've been doing it for the last 40,000 years. Why stop now? Thank you.